There is a specific kind of silence that falls over a room when someone realizes they have made a terrible mistake about another person. Not the silence of respect. Not the silence of awe, the silence of a held breath, that fraction of a second between the moment the ground gives way and the moment the body understands it is falling. This story begins before that silence. It begins in the noise. The camp sat at the edge of the Mojave, the kind of flat, brutal land that made people believe they were tougher than they were simply for surviving the heat. Dust came up in sheets when the wind moved wrong. The sun pressed down like something personal. 47 recruits had arrived that Monday morning, military-adjacent mid-career professionals cycling through a leadership development program run by a private consulting firm that contracted with the Department of Defense. Not active duty, not civilians either. The in-between people, the ones who wore their resumes like armor and walked into rooms already deciding who mattered. Maya Reyes arrived in a white government fleet van with 4 other participants, a duffel bag across her lap and her hair pulled back so tight it looked like a deliberate statement. She was 34, brown-skinned. Medium height in a way that people tended to underestimate until she was standing next to them and they realized the underestimation had been entirely their own invention. She wore no jewelry. She carried nothing that identified her. She had done this on purpose. The program coordinator, a sunburned man named Trask who wore khakis like they were a personality, handed out bunk assignments and lanyards with participant numbers at the entrance. No names on the lanyards, just numbers. The idea, Trask explained, was to strip away professional titles for the first 72 hours. Let the personality lead. Let the leadership emerge organically. He said emerge organically, the way people say phrases they have read without ever examining whether they mean anything. Maya got number 22. She clipped it to her collar and carried her bag to the bunk room. The bunk room was a long converted barrack, 2 rows of metal-framed beds, thin mattresses rolled at the foot of each one, a communal bathroom at the far end with 3 shower stalls, and a rust stain above the middle drain that looked like a country no one wanted to visit. 8 women had been assigned to this room. Maya chose the second bed from the door, close to the exit, far from the center of whatever social dynamics would form overnight. Old habit. The kind of habit that had kept her breathing when breathing was not guaranteed. She was unrolling her mattress when the other women started arriving. The first one through the door was a woman named Brittany, though Maya would not learn that name until later. At this moment, she was simply the woman with the excellent posture and the kind of blonde highlights that required quarterly maintenance and a particular faith in permanence. She assessed the room the way people assess hotel rooms, rapidly, comparatively, with mild disappointment. She took the bed at the far end, which was slightly wider, and began unpacking a toiletry bag that was organized by category. The second and third women came in together, mid-30s, the easy body language of people who had met at a previous event and recognized each other as belonging to the same social tier. They took adjacent beds. One of them, tall with reading glasses pushed up on her head like a headband, glanced at Maya and offered a small nod. The nod of someone acknowledging a presence they had not yet decided to invest in. 2 more women followed. Then the room was mostly full. Maya changed into her program-issued physical training shirt and tucked her civilian clothes into her bag. The PT shirt was oversized, army green, the kind of cotton that gets soft after 20 washes. She pulled it on over her tank top and did not notice, or did not care to notice, how it shifted when she moved. How the hem rode up at the back. How the tank top beneath it sat low enough that, when she bent forward to lace her boots, a narrow band of her lower back was briefly, ordinarily visible. Brittany noticed. "Oh," she said, in the particular tone of someone discovering something they intend to have an opinion about. Interesting choice for a professional development program. The other women in the room did not respond immediately, that half-second lag where everyone waits to see which direction the current is running before they commit to swimming. Maya straightened, laced her second boot, stood up. "Sorry," she said. "The tattoo." Brittany said it the way someone says the mess when they are describing something they have decided is beneath them. "It's just, we're here representing our organizations. There's a certain standard of presentation." The tattoo was on Maya's lower back. It was not the tattoo Brittany thought it was. It was not what anyone in that room thought it was. But at that moment, none of them knew that, and Maya had no intention of explaining it on the first day to a woman she had known for 4 minutes. "Noted," Maya said. It was not agreement. It was not dismissal. It was a door being closed quietly from the inside. Brittany took the response as agreement. This was the first of several mistakes she would make that week, and probably the smallest. The opening session happened in a large tent that had been erected in the center of the compound, canvas sides rolled up to let the desert air move through, ceiling fans working overhead with the optimistic inefficiency of things designed for different climates. 47 participants filled the folding chairs. Trask stood at the front beside a portable whiteboard. Behind him, a screen displayed the program logo, a compass rose with the word LED printed beneath it in a font that wanted to be authoritative and landed somewhere closer to ambitious. There were introductions, just first names. The number lanyards were still the formal identifier, but Trask allowed first names in the tent. The introductions went around the circle in the way introductions always go. Name, current role, described in the least specific terms that still sounded impressive. One sentence about why they were here. The sentence about why they were here was almost universally some version of to grow as a leader or to challenge myself, which were both true and meaningless. Maya, when her turn came, said, "Maya, I work in risk assessment. I'm here because I was told to be." There was a small laugh from the row behind her, a surprised one, the kind pulled out involuntarily, before the person can decide whether the thing is funny or not. Trask blinked. "That's honest." "I try," Maya said. She was not being difficult. She was being exactly what she was, which was someone who had spent years in environments where precision of language was a survival mechanism, and vagueness was a form of lying. She did not know how to do the gentle social inflation of corporate introduction circles. She had been in too many rooms where the wrong word at the wrong moment carried consequences that no amount of charm could walk back. But the room had already filed her somewhere, the woman who gave the odd answer, the woman with the tattoo, the one who didn't play along with the warm-up. These things were not said, they didn't need to be. After the opening session came the first team challenge, a physical problem-solving exercise in the heat, which mostly tested how people reacted to discomfort and whether they defaulted to the loudest voice or the clearest thinking. Maya's team of 6 included Brittany and the woman with the reading glasses, whose name turned out to be Diane. The challenge involved moving a series of weighted boxes from one marked zone to another using only specific equipment: rope, 2 boards, a pulley system that Trask had deliberately made one piece too short to work the obvious way. Brittany took the lead immediately, which is different from assuming command. Taking the lead means moving toward the problem. Assuming command means moving toward the other people and directing them toward the problem. Brittany was doing the second thing, which meant she was holding the clipboard of instructions and explaining to people who were already examining the equipment what the equipment was. Maya was examining the pulley. "If we reroute the second anchor point," she said, "to no one in particular, to the rope in her hands, we get the tension we need without the missing segment." Diane looked over. "Show me." It took about 90 seconds to demonstrate the rerouting, another 4 minutes to rig it properly. The boxes moved. The team finished the exercise second out of 8 groups, behind a team that had apparently included someone who did this recreationally. Brittany wrote down the solution in her notes as though she had been directing it the whole time. Maya did not correct this. She was watching the pulley, the way the rope tracked through the redirected anchor, the small, elegant efficiency of a system repaired with what was already there. Old habit. The oldest one she had. Dinner was in the main hall. Long tables, mess style, people clustering into the social geometries that had formed over the course of the day. Maya sat at the end of a table, with Diane and 2 men from another team who were deep in a conversation about risk modeling and infrastructure that Maya found herself pulled into without intending to be. Brittany sat at the center of the long table with the women from the bunk room and 2 or 3 participants who had found her frequency. Maya could hear the conversation from where she was. Not the words, but the cadence. The laughter at specific intervals, the tone that gatherings take when they are organizing themselves around a center of gravity that is mostly social confidence and largely performance. She heard her number at one point, 22, said in a way that didn't require the words around it to understand the context. Diane heard it too. She glanced at Maya. Maya was looking at her food. "You're going to let that go?" Diane said quietly. "I'm eating dinner," Maya said. "That's not an answer. It's the answer that fits the question." Diane studied her for a moment, the particular look of someone recalibrating an assumption they hadn't realized they'd made. Then she picked up her fork and went back to her meal. And the conversation at their end of the table continued on into the desert evening, while the fans overhead pushed the warm air in slow, indifferent circles. That night in the bunk room, after lights down, Maya lay on her back in the dark and listened to the sounds of the building, the creak of the roof contracting in the cooling air, the distant sound of the generator, someone 2 beds over whose breathing was already the deep regular pull of sleep. She pressed her fingers to her lower back, where the ink sat quiet against her skin. 7 years of carrying it, 3 continents. She had never once explained it to someone who hadn't earned the explanation. She was not going to start now. Outside, the desert made its nighttime sounds. The small skitter of things that moved in the dark, a brief wind that lifted the edge of the tent canvas and let it fall again. The stars over the Mojave were ridiculous, the way nature sometimes got ridiculous. Too much of a thing, no restraint, all of it pouring down on the flat land without apology. Maya closed her eyes. Tomorrow was the physical endurance day. She had been through worse than physical endurance. She had been through the thing that made the tattoo necessary. She let that thought pass through her like the wind through the canvas, present, then gone, the tent settling back into its shape as though nothing had moved at all. In the bed at the far end of the room, Brittany was still awake too, but she was not thinking about tattoos or pulleys, or the woman who had given the strange answer in the opening circle. She was thinking about the group challenge tomorrow and how to position herself for the leadership evaluation at the end of the week. She was thinking about the kind of things people think about when they have never had to think about anything else. Neither of them would sleep well, but only one of them would know why. The second day started before the light did. 4:30 in the morning, a horn sounded across the compound, and 47 people who had been told it might start early but had not believed it understood immediately that belief had been optional and preparedness was not. The physical endurance circuit ran for 3 hours. Weighted packs, terrain navigation, a water crossing that was precisely cold enough to make people regret every decision that had led them here, and then a final ascent up a scrub-covered ridge that topped out at a rocky plateau where Trask stood with a clipboard and a thermos of coffee that he did not share. Maya went up the ridge in the third group. She moved efficiently, not fast, not showy, but with the steady-paced economy of someone who had learned a long time ago that energy spent on performance was energy taken from endurance. Her pack was properly loaded, weight centered, hip belt cinched. She had checked it the night before. Brittany was in the same group. Halfway up the ridge, the terrain narrowed to a single-file path between 2 shelves of rock, and the group compressed into a line. The woman ahead of Maya, number 31, one of the women from the opening session conversation about personal branding, began to slow. Her breathing was audible. Her pack was loaded incorrectly. Maya could see it from behind, the weight riding too high, pulling her backward against the incline. The group slowed with her. Brittany, somewhere behind, made a sound. Not words. Just the particular non-verbal communication of someone who considers their time to be a resource others are stealing. Maya stepped up alongside number 31. Hip belt, she said. Loosen the shoulder straps 2 inches. Let the belt carry it. The woman looked at her. Now, we're in the middle of 30 seconds, or the next half mile is going to feel like the rest of your life. Number 31 stopped, adjusted, started moving again. The difference was immediate and visible. Her posture changed, her stride lengthened, her breathing slowed towards sustainable. How did you know that? She asked. Maya had already turned back to the path. Pack geometry, she said, which was true and was also not the whole truth, which was that she had spent 8 months in terrain worse than this, with packs heavier than this, and had learned pack geometry the way all the most important lessons get learned, by getting it wrong first and paying for it in a currency that had nothing to do with money. They reached the plateau. Trask made notes on his clipboard. Maya drank water and looked out over the flat expanse below, the dawn light spreading across the desert floor like something slow and inevitable, and completely indifferent to the humans standing on the ridge watching it happen. The beauty of the Mojave at dawn was the beauty of something that did not need an audience. It was there whether anyone looked at it or not. It had been there before any of them were born, and it would be there after. She found that comforting in a way she couldn't have explained to anyone who hadn't stood in places where the land outlasted the people. Behind her, she heard Brittany's voice. The group had clustered, as groups do, and the social sorting was happening in real time as people processed the shared physical experience. She's intense, Brittany was saying. Low, but not low enough. Like, militantly intense. Did you see the way she just inserted herself? Nobody asked her. Number 31, whose name turned out to be Carla, said, "She helped me." Sure, but there's a way to do that that doesn't feel like you're being corrected by a stranger, you know? Carla said nothing. Maya turned around. Brittany met her eyes for exactly 1 second and then looked out at the view as though she had been looking at it the whole time. The morning continued. The descent was easier than the ascent, always is. The camp reconvened for breakfast and debrief. People were looser now, the way people get when they have done a hard physical thing together. The shared discomfort creating a temporary social permeability. Strangers briefly reeled to each other in the aftermath of effort. Maya ate her breakfast. She was sitting alone when the camp's senior facilitator, a man who had been present since day one but peripheral, observing, taking notes, not leading sessions, sat down across from her. His name was Wilson. He was 60-something, broad through the shoulders in a way that time had softened but not erased. He wore no lanyard. His coffee mug had no branding on it. He had the particular quality of stillness that belongs to people who have been in enough loud rooms to understand that stillness is a form of authority. "Good morning," he said. "Morning," Maya said. He looked at her the way someone looks at a math problem they haven't worked out yet but recognize as interesting. "That adjustment you made on the ridge," he said. "Packed geometry." "Yes. Where did you learn that?" She looked at him. He looked at her. "The field," she said. Wilson nodded, once, as though she had confirmed something. He picked up his coffee, stood, and walked to the next table. Maya watched him go. Somewhere in the back of her mind, in the part that had been trained to read rooms and people, and the spaces between what was said and what was meant, something registered. She filed it and went back to her ags. The camp had 3 more days to run, and the colonel had not yet asked his question. The third day of any intensive program is the day people stop performing and start revealing. The first 2 days run on adrenaline and social management. People are still curating themselves, still wearing the version of their personality they have decided is appropriate for the audience. They are generous with their laughter and careful with their opinions and strategic about when they help and how visibly they do it. They are, in the most human sense, on. By the third day, the maintenance of the performance costs more than the performance earns. People get tired. Tired is honest. The third day at camp was structured around what Trask called the Leadership Crucible, which was a longer, more complex group simulation that ran from 8 in the morning to 6 in the evening with a single 30-minute break at noon. The simulation was a multi-team resource management scenario. 6 teams, a shared pool of materials and information, competing objectives that were designed to be partially irreconcilable so that negotiation and coalition building were not optional but necessary. The scenario had a winner condition and a collective failure condition. Teams could pursue their individual win condition and trigger the collective failure, or they could sacrifice parts of their individual objective for the shared outcome. The scenario had been used in defense contractor leadership training and executive MBA programs. It reliably, Trask told them, revealed character. Maya was assigned to Team 4. Brittany was assigned to Team 4. Diane was assigned to Team 3. Carla, the woman from the ridge, was assigned to Team 4. Team 4's individual win condition was resource control. They needed to acquire and hold 3 specific materials from the common pool while also meeting 2 deliverable deadlines. It was achievable. It was also, Maya could see immediately after reviewing the materials packet, designed to encourage hoarding behavior that would, if replicated across enough teams, produce the collective failure condition within 4 hours. She said this to Team 4 during their first 10-minute planning session. "We're being set up to act against our own long-term interest," she said. "The individual win condition is a trap. It's designed to feel like the goal." Brittany looked at the materials packet. "The packet says acquire and hold." "The packet says that," Maya agreed. "The scenario design says something else. You're speculating." "I'm reading the resource distribution model. If teams 1 through 6 all move to acquire and hold, the common pool hits depletion by hour 3. There's no collective outcome. Everybody loses, including us. The individual win condition becomes irrelevant because the collective failure voids it." There was a pause around the table. Carla said, "How do you know that?" "I've run scenarios like this before," Maya said. "Different context, same architecture." The different context was something she did not explain. The same architecture was the only relevant part. Brittany leaned back in her chair. "So you're suggesting we give up our objective?" "I'm suggesting we redefine our objective. Coalition building with 2 other teams, even 1, stabilizes the resource pool and positions us as the group that solved the scenario instead of the group that competed ourselves into a collective failure. That's a risk. Everything is a risk. The question is which failure you can live with." That landed in the room with a weight that was slightly more than the words. Brittany looked at her for a long moment. The look was not hostile exactly. It was the look of someone measuring something they hadn't expected to need to measure. "Fine," she said. "Propose it. But if it doesn't work, we revert to acquisition mode, and we're no worse off than we would have been." They proceeded. Maya spent the first 45 minutes of the simulation moving between teams, not as a representative of Team 4, but as an individual participant, which was technically permitted under the rules, and which most people hadn't noticed was permitted. because they were too focused on the team structure to read the individual participation clause. She talked to Team 2 and Team 6. She did not pitch them. She showed them the resource distribution model and let them read it themselves. People believe conclusions they reach independently with much more conviction than conclusions they are handed. Team 2 agreed to coalition within 20 minutes. Team 6 took until after the noon break, and by then Team 3 had triggered the first resource contention event, and Trask was watching from the back of the tent with the expression of someone seeing a familiar sequence unfold, with the specific interest of someone who already knows the ending. By 3 in the afternoon, Teams 2, 4, and 6 were operating as an informal coalition, sharing resource distribution and coordinating deliverable timelines. Team 1 had acquired 2 of the 3 materials they needed for their win condition and were discovering that the third was now effectively unavailable due to the depletion event. Team 3 was in a full internal argument about strategy. Team 5 had quietly abandoned their win condition and were trying to renegotiate access to the common pool. At 5:30, the coalition delivered. Collective outcome achieved. Individual win condition for Teams 2, 4, and 6 achieved within coalition parameters. Trask wrote something on his clipboard for a long time. Wilson, who had been at the back of the tent all day, stood up and walked to the front. Wilson stood at the front of the tent and looked at the 47 participants the way someone looks at a thing they have seen before and are checking to see whether it held up. Before debrief, he said, "I want to ask Team 4 a question." Every head in the room turned toward Team 4's table. Maya did not move. "The individual participation clause," Wilson said. "Most programs, it goes unused. People stay inside the team structure because the team structure feels like the assignment." Who identified it? Brittany's hands were flat on the table in front of her. Carla was looking at Maya. "I did," Maya said. "Why?" "Because the problem wasn't a team problem. The team structure was the problem. You can't solve a systemic resource issue from inside a single node. You need mobility across the system." Wilson looked at her for a moment. "What's your background?" he said. The room was quiet in the way rooms go quiet when the question is the wrong size for the context, when it's bigger than what the moment should be able to hold. "Risk assessment," Maya said. "Before that." She held his gaze. "Why does before that matter?" "It doesn't," Wilson said. "I'm curious." There was a particular quality to the way he said it. Not aggressive, not testing. The curiosity of someone who already has a theory and is checking to see if the evidence matches. Maya said nothing. Wilson moved on to the debrief. But he had not looked away yet when he moved on, which was the thing Maya noticed. That night, the dynamic in the bunk room had shifted in the small but measurable way that dynamics shift after the third day. Brittany was quieter. Not hostile. She wasn't built for hostility. Her conflict mode was social friction rather than direct confrontation, but quieter in the way of someone recalibrating. Carla had moved her toiletry bag from its original shelf to the one closer to Maya's bunk, which was not a grand gesture but was not nothing. 2 of the other women had started asking Maya questions during the evening wind-down. About the scenario, about the coalition approach, about the individual participation clause. Maya answered them, not at length. Enough. She had not changed. The room had moved toward her, which was different. After the others fell asleep, Diane came in late from a debriefing conversation with Trask and sat on the edge of her bunk. She looked at Maya's bunk. Maya was reading, a small headlamp clipped to her collar. "Wilson was watching you all day," Diane said. "I know. He's not just a facilitator. I know that too." Diane pulled off her boots. "Who are you exactly?" Maya set down her book. She looked at Diane with the particular expression of someone who is deciding not how much to say, but whether to say anything at all, and has already mostly decided, and is just giving the decision a moment to confirm itself. "Someone who has done this before," she said, "in a different context. You keep saying that, because it's the accurate answer. It's the incomplete answer. Those are sometimes the same thing." Diane held her gaze for a moment, then lay back on her bunk and looked at the ceiling. "The tattoo," she said. "Brittany made a comment to 2 of the women from Team 1 about it. During lunch, I thought you should know." The light from Maya's headlamp caught the side of her face, the particular stillness that had been there since day 1, but was maybe more visible now in the quiet of the room. She turned back to her book. "She can say what she wants," Maya said. "It doesn't bother you?" "Lots of things bother me. I just don't carry them where anyone can see." She turned a page. Diane watched her for a moment, then closed her eyes. The generator hummed its nighttime song. The desert breathed its slow, vast breath through the gaps in the building's walls, warm and dry and indifferent to the small human dramas inside. Maya read until her eyes got heavy, then turned off the lamp, and lay in the dark with her hand flat against her lower back, the way she had been doing since the first night. The tattoo was not decorative. She had gotten it on a Tuesday in Ramstein, in a shop near the base, from an artist who had done 100 military tattoos and who had not asked what it meant because he had learned that the people who needed to explain their ink were not the people who had earned it. He had been precise and quick and had told her afterward that the work was good. She had agreed. She had looked at it in the mirror. The coordinates, the date, the single name beneath them, the small line of text in Arabic that she had written out in block letters on a piece of paper and handed to him without translation, and felt the thing she had expected to feel, which was not grief exactly, and not relief exactly, but the settlement of something that had been floating loose inside her for a year and now had a place to be. She had not shown it to anyone since. Not because she was ashamed, not because she was hiding it, but because it was not a story you could tell to someone who hadn't been in the rooms where it happened, and she had not been in any of those rooms in a long time, and the people she had been in them with were not available for the telling. The coordinates were for a village. The date was the day it survived. The name was the name of the man who made that happen, who was not her, though she had been the one who saw it coming and made the call that gave him the chance to make it happen. The Arabic was a single phrase. She did not translate it for anyone. She turned onto her side in the narrow bunk and let the desert quiet do what quiet does when you have learned to let it. Settle into the spaces where the noise had been, and hold there, cool and still as dry land after rain. The fourth day opened with something none of them had been told to expect. Wilson led the morning session himself. Trask was there, clipboard present, but he was not at the front of the tent. Wilson stood at the front in the same plain clothes he had worn all week. No logo, no lanyard, and he looked at the 47 participants, the way someone looks at a group they have already sorted in their mind and are now simply verifying against the list. Yesterday, he said, something happened in this program that doesn't usually happen. No one spoke. Most programs run the crucible and get the predictable result. Teams optimize for individual win conditions. The resource pool depletes. Collective failure occurs at hour 4 or 5. We discuss why. We extract the lesson. People go home with a new mental model they may or may not apply. He paused. Yesterday, someone read the scenario architecture before the scenario and chose mobility over structure. If you were in a room with that person yesterday, you already know who I'm talking about. 46 heads turned toward Team 4's table. Maya was looking at Wilson. I want to be clear about something, Wilson said. That's not a leadership skill that comes from a training program. It comes from a specific kind of operational experience. He looked at Maya. The room was very quiet. I'm not going to ask you to explain yourself, he said, but I am going to ask everyone else in this room to notice something. Notice that the most significant leadership behavior we've seen in this program came from someone who, as of 2 days ago, some of you had already decided was either difficult or irrelevant. Nobody moved. That's the actual leadership lesson, Wilson said, not the crucible. That. He walked back to his chair at the side of the tent. Trask picked up the session. Maya was still looking at the front of the tent, not at Wilson anymore. He had sat down, but at the space where he had been standing. At the words that were still in the air above the folding chairs, and the dust and the 46 people who were now very carefully not looking at her in the specific way that meant they were thinking about her harder than they had been thinking about anything else all week. She felt Brittany's stillness at the edge of her peripheral vision. She did not turn to look. She would not know until tomorrow what Wilson was actually asking. She would not know until the question itself, the real one, the one that would silence a room in a way that silence rarely happens, landed in the air between them like a dropped stone, clean and final, and the surface of everything that had been assumed about her broke open and settled into a new shape entirely. Tomorrow. The Colonel's question was coming. She just didn't know yet what it would cost her to answer it. The 5th day of the program had a different weight to it from the moment the sun came up. People could feel endings. Even when they couldn't name what they were feeling, they felt it. The particular texture of a last morning, the way ordinary actions like lacing boots or pouring coffee took on a small extra significance simply because they were happening for the last time in a specific context. The camp would break at noon. Participants would be back in their own lives by evening. The person they had been here would fold back into the person they were everywhere else, and the two versions would sit uncomfortably inside the same body for a few days until the camp version faded and the regular one filled the space back up. Some people found this a relief. Maya found it neutral. She had moved between enough contexts. enough versions of a life lived in different registers, that the folding and unfolding of identity was not an event but a condition. She had been many things in many rooms, and she was all of them still, carrying them the way the tattoo carried what it carried, permanently, quietly, without requiring the room to know. She folded her clothes, packed her bag, made her bed with the corners tight, tighter than the program required, tight the way she had been making beds since she was 20 years old, in a room that was much less comfortable than this one, and where the tightness of the corners had been a reflection of something: control, discipline, the management of the variables you could manage because the variables you couldn't manage were trying to kill you. Old habit. Carla was sitting on her bunk watching her. "You make a bed like you've been doing it a long time," Carla said. "Since I was young," Maya said. Accurate, incomplete. Military? Maya smoothed the last corner, stood up. "Once upon a time." Carla nodded. She did not push further, which Maya noted and respected. There were people who needed the story and people who needed only the outline, and Carla was the second kind, which was the easier kind to be around. Brittany was already gone, bag packed, taken to the central collection area, the woman herself somewhere in the compound doing whatever Brittany did at the end of things. Maya had not spoken to her since Wilson's speech the morning before. They had moved through the fourth day in the polite parallel manner of people who share a space and have agreed without discussing it to treat the shared space as sufficient social interaction. The fourth day had been quieter in general. The simulation and the speech had created a kind of atmospheric change. Not resolution, not warmth, but a shift in pressure, the difference between weather that is building and weather that has passed and left the air altered behind it. People were thoughtful in the afternoon sessions in a way they hadn't been before. The questions in the debrief were better questions. The conversations at dinner were more honest, less curated. Nobody mocked the tattoo again. Nobody referenced it at all, which was a different thing from its absence. The active not saying of something is still a saying of it, carried in negative space. Maya had not thought about the tattoo in relation to the camp for the last 2 days. She had thought about it in relation to itself, the way she always did. The quiet interior check-in that happened so automatically it barely qualified as thought. The coordinates, the date, the name. The Arabic phrase that had no good translation into English, not because the concept was untranslatable, but because English didn't have a single word for the specific combination of grief and gratitude and responsibility that the phrase held, so she had left it in the language that held it best. She had thought about it the way you think about a scar, not with pain, not with pride, but with the particular intimacy of a thing that is yours, and is also a record of something that is gone. The final session was scheduled for 9 in the morning in the main tent and was billed as closing integration, which was the program's language for the session where Trask walked participants through the week's frameworks and facilitated a group reflection intended to produce insight and, less explicitly, testimonials that could be used in future program marketing. Maya had been to enough closing sessions in enough contexts to know the shape of them. She was not hostile to it. She was simply aware of what it was. She took a seat at the back of the room. Wilson was there again. He was sitting in the same chair he had occupied all week, to the side of the front, at an angle that let him see both the presenter and the participants without being part of either. His coffee mug. His stillness. The particular quality of his attention, which was the attention of someone who has already processed what most people are still arriving at. Trask opened the session with a summary of the week's frameworks, the leadership emergence model, the coalition dynamics, the resource management principles. He was good at summaries. The frameworks landed cleanly, and Maya thought, not for the first time, that Trask was better as a translator than as a teacher. He could not generate the insight himself, but he could explain it to people who hadn't been there for the generation. After 30 minutes of summary, Trask moved into the reflection portion. "This week," he said, "I want to open the floor for anything the group wants to name. Observations, realizations, things that surprised you about yourself or others. This is not evaluated. This goes no further than this tent. The tent where 47 people were sitting. The customary pause of group reflection, where everyone waits for someone else to go first. Diane went first. "I came here thinking I already knew how I led," she said. "I think I learned that what I thought was my leadership style was mostly just my comfort zone." Which is a different thing. Murmurs of recognition. Trask wrote something. A man from Team 1 talked about the crucible, about how his team had gone for the individual win condition and what it felt like when the collective failure condition triggered and they lost everything they'd been chasing. A woman from Team 5 talked about asking for help. The tent moved through its expected emotional range. Honesty, some vulnerability. the group settling into the shared experience of the week as something worth naming. Then Wilson stood up. He stood up the way people stand up when they have been waiting for the right moment and have decided the moment is now. "I want to ask a question," he said. Trask stepped back from the whiteboard. Wilson looked at the room. Then his gaze settled on Maya at the back. "Maya," he said, "I've been watching you all week." She looked at him. "You identified a systemic flaw in the simulation architecture before the simulation ran. You moved through the scenario using individual mobility across team structures in a way that required reading the entire system rather than your node of it. You adjusted a team member's equipment load on a ridge at altitude with the precise efficiency of someone who has done it under real conditions. Your pack was loaded to military field standard on day one, and yesterday morning, when I asked you about operational experience, you redirected the question in exactly the way people are trained to redirect questions." The tent was very still, not the polite stillness of a group respecting a speaker. The dense atmospheric stillness of people who have stopped breathing to hear what comes next. "You were in the service," Wilson said. It was not quite a question. It was the last step of a sequence, laid down like a stone, and the stone waiting for her answer to confirm whether it had found ground or not. "Yes," Maya said. "How long?" 11 years. "Rank?" She held his gaze. "Chief Warrant Officer 3, she said. "Military intelligence." The room changed. Not loudly. No one gasped. No one made a sound that could be named. But the room changed the way rooms change when the actual shape of something is revealed, and the shape is different from every assumption that had been sitting in the chairs. There was a reconfiguration happening in real time, visible if you were watching for it. 46 people adjusting their understanding of the week they had just spent with this woman, revising every moment they had filed under one interpretation and now pulling it out and placing it under another. 11 years. Military intelligence. Chief Warrant Officer 3. "The Crucible scenario," Wilson said. "Where did you encounter that architecture before?" "Open. Veritable resource coordination," Maya said. "Multinational coalition planning. Managing competing national objectives within a shared operational framework." The scenario was a small-scale version. Wilson nodded. "The packed geometry on the ridge." 8 months in country, Maya said. "Mountainous terrain. We learned pack loading fast." Wilson was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "The tattoo." The word landed differently than it had on day one. The same word, different weight. The whole room felt it. The particular resonance of a thing that had been used as a social weapon and was now being handled with care by the only person in the room who had authority to handle it either way. Maya did not answer immediately. She was looking at Wilson, and she was thinking about the Tuesday in Ramstein, and the artist who had not asked, and the coordinates, and the date, and the name, and the Arabic phrase that had no English word wide enough to hold it. "I don't owe this room that story," she said, "but I'll tell you this much. The tent was the most silent it had been all week. There was a village," she said, "in a province I won't name. There was an intelligence assessment that had been moving through the chain for 3 weeks and losing resolution at every transfer. By the time it reached the decision level, it had been revised into something that bore almost no relationship to what the original sources indicated. I was the one who could still see the original." She paused. "I made a call that was outside my authorization level. I routed the original assessment directly to the operational commander, bypassing 2 levels. If I had been wrong, I would have been court-martialed, possibly worse." Another pause. The tent held its breath. "I was not wrong." "The village survived," Maya said. 214 people. One of them was a man named Omar al-Rashid, who had been my primary source for 8 months. The tattoo has his name on it, and the date, and the coordinates of the village." She stopped. The white space after the sentence was not empty. It was full of everything that had been sitting under the surface of the week. Every small moment of dismissal, every sideways comment about professional standards, every lanyard-numbered assumption about who this woman was and what she was worth. All of it was in that white space, visible now, its actual size revealed against the thing she had just told them. Wilson looked at her for a long moment. "Thank you," he said. And then, after a pause that was its own kind of language, he asked the question, the actual question, the one that would stun the room. "Are you still active with the intelligence community?" She had not expected that specific question, not the shape of it, not the direction. She looked at him with the particular steadiness of someone who has learned to mask surprise and felt, in the space where surprise would have lived, the small click of something recognizing something. "Why would you ask that?" she said. Wilson reached into the breast pocket of his plain shirt and produced a card. He held it across the space between them. Maya rose from her chair at the back of the tent, walked the length of the room past 46 people who were not moving, and took the card from his hand. She read it. She read it again. The card had no logo. A name, a phone number, 4 letters in a corner that people who had never spent time in certain rooms would not recognize. People who had spent time in those rooms would recognize them immediately. Her expression did not change. She put the card in her pocket. "I'll consider it," she said. She walked back to her seat at the back of the tent. Trask, who had been standing at the whiteboard for 7 minutes without writing anything, cleared his throat. "Well," he said, "does anyone else have—" Closing reflections. At the center of the room, Brittany was sitting very still, her hands flat on the table, her chin slightly lowered. She was not looking at anyone. She was looking at the table surface with the expression of someone going through a rapid interior process they had not expected to need to go through, and that was not, from the outside, comfortable to watch. Maya noticed this. She did not feel satisfaction. Satisfaction would have required that she had wanted something from Brittany, and she had not wanted anything from her. She had not wanted anything from any of them except to complete the week and go home. What she felt was older and quieter than satisfaction. It was the feeling of a thing having run its course, of a sequence being complete. Not resolution. She did not believe in resolution in the neat sense, the sense where things end and stay ended, but completion in the sense of a circle returning to its start point, the shape of an event having become visible in retrospect. She had walked into this camp carrying 11 years and a tattoo, and the name of a man who had survived a village because she had read a room correctly and acted on what she read. She was walking out of it with a card in her pocket. The Arabic on her back translated, imprecisely, roughly, into something like, the dead of the seen thing. The idea that when you see what others cannot see or will not see, and you act on that seeing, the seeing becomes a responsibility. Not a burden, a responsibility. Something owed, not to the people who mocked you for it, but to the thing itself. To the truth of what you saw and the obligation not to look away. She had not looked away. She had not looked away in the province with the village. She had not looked away on the ridge. She had not looked away in the crucible. She had not looked away in this tent, even when it was easier and more comfortable to be invisible, to let people file her wherever they needed to file her, and wait out the week in the quiet she was capable of maintaining. Looking away was the thing she had stopped doing years before she had the tattoo to remind her. Outside the tent, the Mojave sat in its enormous, indifferent beauty, the dust lifting and settling, the sky already pressing down with the day's heat, the flat expanse running out to the horizon in all directions the way the flat expanse of things always ran, further than it looked, requiring more than people thought they had, yielding in the end to the ones who went in with their eyes open. The closing session continued around her. She sat at the back of the tent with the card in her pocket and her hands loose in her lap, and her face carrying the expression it had carried all week. Present, contained, watching, and she let the last hour of the program run its course around her, while the desert outside did what the desert always did, endured, without explanation, without apology, without ever once needing the room to know how long it had been there. Mocked at camp, she revealed her back tattoo. The colonel's question stunned everyone.